Good afternoon. I'm Miriam Grace Go, Rappler's investigative editor, and you are watching Newsbreak Chats. Newsbreak Chats is our monthly huddle with Rappler journalists and occasionally our sources to share insights, analysis, and even inside stories about the in-depth reports that we have tackled. Even after President-elect Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. has been proclaimed, certain camps still raise allegations that the polls were rigged. Among other things, they are asking why his closest rival, Vice President Leni Robredo, her votes were consistently at a certain percentage of Bongbong Marcos's votes throughout the transmission of results. They also raise suspicions about why the completion of the transmission was faster than in past elections. There are also some talks about supposed altered codes, pre-programmed results in the vote counting machines, even results supposedly being intercepted and changed. But helping us get to the bottom of all these allegations in our latest episodes are Gemma Bagayawa Mendoza is our head of digital strategy, and we have Dylan Salcedo, a data scientist with our forensics unit. We also have our partners from the election watchdogs. Lito Averia is the systems group head of NAMFREL, and William Yu is director of information technology with the PPCRV. Thank you for your willingness to take the hot seats, given the hot topic that we are going to be discussing. So I've mentioned some forms of cheating, alleged forms of cheating that have been circulating online, but please feel free to share any other allegations or conspiracy theories that you've encountered, and we'll gladly discuss all of those too. So I guess we start with the basics to make our audience understand yung proseso ng transmission para masundan nila while we are discussing, and we should be showing our infographic about this. Simula tayo saan? Sa pag-fill up ng balota or yung pag-feed na?
So, as soon as a person votes, diba, the ballot is fed into the machine, but the machine does not count it yet, right?
Well,
it
technically,
records.
the machine reads it because it produces the VVPAT.
Yes.
Right? But there's no tally.
So, the tally happens after.
So all the voters in that precinct nakapagpasok ng balota. Each time pinapasok yung balota, the image is recorded.
It's recorded,
Yes.
it's appreciated,
Appreciated.
and the VVPAT is printed, right? And that's what you compare.
And the voter
Gets
checks.
the VVPAT, checks it. Yep.
Yeah. Yun po yung sinasabi nila na resibo, na sabi nila wag papakita sa iba after you've checked kung na-reflect ng tama yung boto, pinapalagay sa atin sa box. And then when the precincts close, what happens to the VCM? What do they do?
There's a ceremony, diba?
You lock
Since
it.
close- well, you change the status of the VCM, from poll open to polls closed, and that will be followed by the counting of votes, and then the printing of the first 8 copies of the ER, the election returns, followed by the transmission of the election returns, and then followed by the printing of 22 other copies.
Yeah, and just to add a little more detail to that. So after closing, that is when the ballots are actually, the votes are actually counted, right? It produces a quote-unquote results file. So that results file is also stored within the system, and that is the one that's digitally signed, right? So you see the ceremony where they close polls and they actually put in their iBot. At least for the NCR, Cebu and Davao, you will see each BEI insert their keys. That's the act of signing each of the digital election returns. Then, as Lito mentioned, they're printed 8 times. We keep the 4th, right? And that's what we send to our command center for encoding. After that, that is the only time the modem is plugged in, right? So there were some cases where it was reported to us that the SD cards were replaced. And we actually got field reports that people complaining the SD cards were replaced. And when we did the further investigation, it was actually the modem being
connected.
inserted.
Okay.
Because these USB modems look like thumb drives, right? So
Like,
people
like
were
your flash drive.
correct. So people thought that, the
Anong
EB
device to?
was trying to replace
Replace
the
the
software, right? But of course, we tell people, no, that's the transmission modem. And besides, that's why we have the pre-transmission copies. The first 8 was already printed by that time.
Okay.
Transmission is done 3 times, right? Municipal Board of Canvassers, Central Server, and Transparency Server. Municipal Board of Canvassers for the canvassing of local positions, mayor, vice mayor, city council, etc. The Central Server, which serves as the COMELEC backup. And at the same time, it is also the results you see at the COMELEC results website. So if you visit COMELEC's website, you will see a link there for election results. That's where you will see precinct level, down to the precinct. You can search the precinct and you can get the results
But
for
it's
that
not
precinct.
tabulated,
It's
diba?
because they're not allowed
Yes.
to, right? So they're not allowed to. So they can only show the results. Then what we get, election
Via the
observers,
transparency
we
server.
don't like to be called watchdogs. So election observers, political parties, and the media will get our
kami yun.
results from the transparency server.
And it's the same file that's received by everybody. May sequence lang siya.
Based
It's
on
a
the law.
huge file
Yeah.
that's actually like batched, like the ERs are batched into one
One
CSV
package.
file.
Really
Oh,
big
one-
file.
oo, yan.
Send every 15 minutes.
That you basically have to interpret
Correct.
and summarize. And that's what we render.
From this, dapat ma-explain din natin kasi yung iba sinasabi, bakit kumpleto na yung count ng national positions hindi pa napoproclaim yung mayor namin or governor namin. Kasi di ba may ladderized
The process.
canvassing sa local na kailangan again yung physical
Even at
na
the
COC.
national level, ladderized pa rin siya. It's like, like William mentioned, at the city municipal level, they canvass all positions actually, from national down to local. Except that dun sa city municipal level, pag natapos yung canvass ng mayor, vice mayor, and councilors, they proclaim. Okay? And then they send the certificates of canvass for the provinces, provincial office, including the member of the House of Representatives. They also transmit the COC, certificate of canvass for president, vice president, and senators. No?
That was why you'll notice that when the media reports, even if it's based on the numbers from the COMELEC server, we always say unofficial.
Yes.
Yeah. But something to keep in mind, G, what we are receiving sa side ng transparency and media server are ER level results, not
Yeah.
municipal or
Presinto,
province level.
ER.
So for instance, and it's not constant, like, okay, wala yung schedule. Like, basically, it's
When the
dictated
ER is
by
ready to send,
the
they will
realities underground. So for instance, tapos na itong precinct na to, and we validated this. Basically, the precincts are required to wait till 7 o'clock. And then from 7 o'clock, it's all that
That's when they
ceremony.
can close.
Yeah.
Oo, ganon. So in effect, from that point is any minute from that, the precincts could
Transmit.
But if
Kaya
there are still
bumubuhos
people,
yung first batch.
Yes.
Kasi pag sarado ng lahat ng mga
Pwede
VC,
sila lahat
kung mga
mag-transmit.
maliliit, na presinto, pwede na sila talaga
Those that don't have
mag-transmit.
lines, those that can close on time, will transmit.
And those that have good transmission.
And
Right.
kung maganda yung
Oo,
signal,
signal.
sa area.
Oo.
Just to clarify, if people are saying bakit hindi pa na-proclaim si mayor but we already know the president, technically speaking, president hasn't been proclaimed yet at that point, right? So the ladderized process means that mayor, vice mayor gets proclaimed first before governor, vice governor, before president, vice president. So what we're seeing is we're comparing unofficial results with
official
official
sa
results.
local.
So that's also one thing to take note of,
Yes.
that it's actually not faster because we already know the mayor, who voted for mayor at that precinct, right? It was just not proclaimed.
Plain.
At saka, at each canvassing level, may challenges pa yan with the different parties involved. No? So,
Let us wait for
that-
precinct
Yeah.
number. Yeah. So
it delays.
Kaya
So-
matagal doon.
Yes.
Oo.
So sometimes they have to wait for, like in Pasay, for example, 12:30, isang clustered precinct na lang.
Inintay.
Hinintay
Quezon
yung
City,
kinabukasan.
5 a.m. yata, Mating, Quezon City, they were waiting for one clustered precinct that came in the early hours of the morning. That's why the mayor was proclaimed the next day din. Diba?
Yeah.
But meantime, at the national level, because the machines nga can
Na-add up
transmit anytime, di ba? Hindi yan,
have a view.
hindi yan hampered by these,
By that
yung
one
mga-
clustered
yung
precinct from
processes.
Pasay.
Oo.
And the focus of the transparency media server is always on the national positions of president, vice president, and senators. Right? That has always been the focus. That's why this year, sa NAMFRO, what we did was to enable our volunteers on the ground to come up with their own canvas
Yes.
for the local positions. So yun naman yung nangyari doon.
Yeah, because what you see normally in dashboards, even in our dashboard, would be the national
National.
positions, president, vice president, senators. And by public demand, we started showing party list na rin because
Yeah.
I think in 2016 they were complaining, why don't we show the party list? Although we wrote an app already, we have votemetrics.ppcrv.org. You can search any position. You can search your mayor who voted for that particular mayor and that particular. So during election day, as we receive the transparency survey results, you can actually find out. Because in 2013, we run a call center after elections. Most of the calls would be, what's the status of mayor ganito in this town? And it was just too much to handle.
Right.
Because people know we have the results, right? So what we did is we put it in a web system instead. So at least now you can drill down. You can even do this precinct, this barangay, for example, what was their presidential vote breakdown? It could be at that level. Now the difference between our site and the COMELEC results site is COMELEC results sites will not tally. We show the running
They're
tally
not
for that.
mandated
Yeah.
to do that.
Mandated tally, yeah.
Pakiulit yung URL so that
votemetrics.ppcrv.org.
Let's check it. Dylan, you wrote an explainer about Leni Robredo's votes being consistently at 47% of Bongbong Marcos's votes throughout the transmission. And Lito also posted about it on social media. And you both said that this is not an indication of cheating. Tell us why.
Yeah. So actually, publicly, what people can see is that you have an aggregated number of votes in the hour resolution. So every 1 hour naga-update. But what we can get is that since any precinct can submit their can transmit their ER in the minute level, we can see now kung a more refined version of that 47%. And that's what we try to investigate. Na nakita namin na okay, yeah, it is a constant 47%. But we don't think that this is a cause for alarm. Kasi we saw that even that at the time when the ratio of 47% was already observed is the time on COMELEC's first release at around this was around 8:24 p.m. right?
So an hour has passed.
Yeah, but at that time, meron ng around 44% of all ERs have already transmitted. And that's around 29 million votes, 30 million votes, which we think is already a large number. It's kind of representative of your
Final result.
final result. So, bakit kaya same lang yung ratio niya? It's because we call this in statistics, it's kind of like the law of large numbers. Na think of it if you flip a coin 100,000 times. Tapos 50% heads, 50% tails. Kunyari, you flip it one more
It's a
time.
balanced and honest coin.
Yes. If you flip it one more time, that one flip will not matter with the whole
With the
50%
whole
ratio.
50%.
Kasi it's like putting a drop into a swimming pool and the volume of the swimming pool won't increase. Pero, the only way to see if that 47% is kind of mysterious is if you look at the lower transmission
Levels.
lower transmission levels. So what you can see here, maybe siguro around 7:30, where only around 0.07% of ERs have been transmitted. That's around 100,000 lang.
And at that time, ano yung percentage?
Yes, at that time it's around around 2%. 20% ratio
The
compared to
ratio
that
is
47%. And it fluctuates very chaotically because dumadagdag, and as ERs come in, that's still a small representative.
There's a lot of variability actually
Yes, exactly.
between transmissions. No? Yung components ng transmission.
Yes.
That's because yung sa transmission, right? Ano na yun aggregated.
Yes.
So what
Exactly.
the public saw is the
30
ratio
plus
based
percent.
on the aggregated
Yes.
votes.
But if you look at the actually yung manual, in-examine namin to minute by minute yung for each minute.
Kung
like
minute
the-
by minute, anong nakita
Oo.
natin?
yung summaries niya, ganun din, as Dillon was pointing out. Like, you just look at the raw, like what's added every minute for each of the candidates. Lalo na doon sa, even after the, like,
You see the incremental versus
the increments are so, there's a lot of variability, variation to that. The other thing I noticed was they were looking at 2 decimal points. We're talking millions here. You cannot just be looking at 2 decimal points. Kasi talaga magra-round up ka pag 2 decimal points na siya.
Yeah, and just to add, this is a blast from the past nga sa 60-30-10.
Yeah.
So just
Yes.
as we were
2013,
talking,
yeah.
so it's not the first time we're seeing a pattern, and I'm pretty sure it will not be the last time. Now, in this particular election cycle, we didn't bother explaining it ourselves anymore. So when people ask, we would send the Rappler article that was written in 2013. We would show, we wouldn't even respond to it anymore. But again, like as you said at the start of the discussion, some things merit answers because they recur and people aren't satisfied. So in this case, we did one better. We said, invite anybody who wants to look at the data and tell us for yourselves. We got real statisticians, data scientists, etc. So we invited from many schools. Those who showed up, the first group was from La Salle and Ateneo. They showed up right away, same day, right? So they showed up, they did the analysis. The professor from Ateneo had a doctorate in Japan in data science, right? His analysis, he did the breaking down, so region, province, precinct. The moment you broke it down by regional level, the pattern's gone. Region 5 and 6 voted for another candidate, obviously.
Yes.
You break it down to provincial level, Quezon province voted for another. So it breaks down. If you broke it down per precinct, disappears entirely. The La Salle professor did an analysis also, was slightly different. So every professor who came, right, and these were statisticians, data scientists from these universities, FEU and UST sent as well, and UP sent as well, and they made their own statement. The statements we posted in our website, our Facebook page, UP posted a statement of their own, and they did a study. We even did one better. There was one who was really masipag, did a study on so there's this paper about block voting trends and how to detect cheating in elections, where they compare different countries, Russia, Uganda, etc., right? And you will see this pattern where if there's clustering on particular location, a particular candidate who wins, if the cluster is too concentrated in the upper right, it's a sign of teaching. They also did that analysis as well. So I think people wanted to find different ways, and some of the ways were creative, like the president of FEU himself actually came, and he did the per minute an analysis. He broke it down, because if you look at it on the big time chunks, right? And at the later times, it will look like the pattern.
Yes.
The moment you broke it down per minute,
In the
especially in the
earlier
earlier parts, you will see the variation. So they did that as well. So it's just that, when people see the big number right away, they think that there is supposed to be some variation. But again, like as Dylan said, right? It was a big percent, 44% by first.
Transmissions after that point, after that 815, 820 point, medyo it had come close to that estimated, 47%. So parang nag-flatten na rin siya.
Yeah.
No?
So Google,
But-
law of large numbers, right?
Yeah. So
Statistically
just this
significant
morning, I was looking at, where the votes went at per region basis. It would the margins would range from 20% to about 70%
Yes.
across the regions.
The variation.
And if you're trying to cook an elections that way and trying to it's it's so
komplikado, ha?
It's very
Oo.
complicated.
Ang galing mo
It's
naman.
complicated. Yeah, it's kind of complicated.
Because the pattern, if it were a hard-coded pattern in the machine, it should be exactly the same per
Same.
precinct.
Yeah.
As a matter
But
of fact,
it's
if we can even find a precinct
Unless
that's
you
exactly the
can
same,
do this for 100,000.
107,000 precincts.
Like, how do you do
It's
that?
good you pointed that out, na wala kang makikitang presinto na magkaparehong
It's
magkapareho.
exactly the same.
Yeah.
And we have 107,000 plus clustered precincts. Pero may nagko-question din, bakit daw mabilis yung transmission ngayon kumpara sa nakaraang elections? And some people naman from the Marcos camp are saying, so ano bang gusto nyo?
Mabilis,
Dati
mabagal.
mabagal, nagrereklamo kayo, may dayaan. Ngayon mabilis, nagrereklamo, may dayaan din. Although kailangan natin i-point out that before the elections, it was the Marcos camp that kept on raising doubts, sa
Yeah.
credibility ng election process. Sa ngayon yung kabilang camp naman. So, Can we answer that? Bakit mabilis yung transmission?
Are you talking about the reality of Philippine politics, that there are winners and cheats?
You measure yung transmission rates, no? Like the number of ERs per minute kasi the transmission is like every 15-minute cycles, right?
The release of the
The release
The
of the
release.
data.
Of the data.
But the transmission happens any
When
minute.
they have
any
it.
time.
any second actually. Like there's variations
Kaya
at
nga,
second.
within
level
that
pa.
first cycle, may timestamps yan.
Yes.
No?
Oo.
So you can measure the number of ERs transmitted on a per minute basis.
That's right.
Right? So that would be
per
the
second basis. nga.
per second pa nga.
Pero
That
ang
would be the transmission rate, right? But the funny thing is, if compared with 2019,
2019. So if you look at
2019 was actually faster
In the
than
first hour.
2022.
In the first hour.
Yes.
So in the first hour of transmission, 2019 was already over 50% after the
Yes.
first hour.
Ilan tayo ngayon ng isang oras?
It was 40,
mga
30
nasa
something,
40.
nearly 40%.
Yeah.
Yung during that period
The first
na,
hour, right? But by the fifth hour, they came close.
Yeah.
And of course, by the sixth hour, you will see that there are more transmitted overall. But of course, in this election, there are more transmitted overall, period.
Overall.
Overall.
See, basically, what we noticed though is this, like, and this is in a way, you credit Comelec. In the past, like, I think with every election, nagkakaroon ng, because of the complaints, diba, and then
Glitches.
we've been pushing them to make more of the ERs transparent to us.
Yeah.
They've really been improving on the systems. In fairness, diba? Like in 2013, if you recall, there was a point na wala na tayo natatanggap. So in 2013, if you look at the graph, there were two bumps. The first bump was yung bugso
First
right
hour.
after.
Right after.
But there was a period na stall yun. It was stagnant. I think mga nasa 60 something %. Tapos it ended at over, I was looking at it, mga 73% around that point yung napasok nung 2013.
Yeah,
And that
69.12.
Oo,
that's where we stopped in
tumigil
2013.
siya ng ganon. And at that time, and then days after, biglang nagbugso. And
Yeah.
what happened there? Kasi we were wondering, kasi towards midnight pati yung dami-daming nag-transmit. Sabi ko, totoo pa ba to? May may nangyayari ba sa ground? So the thing to understand is, the
Malakas daw ang
transmissions
signal pag gabi.
are reflective, always reflective, dapat of something happening on the ground. Meaning, may precinct na natapos magbotohan and nakapag-transmit siya. So, what we always ask for kay Comelec actually, like, kasi may times ang tagal na nating naghihintay doon, di ba, sa kung saan man sa
Popeyes or UST.
Ayan, sa UST. Meron pa bang
May dadating pa ba?
Oo, may dadating pa ba? And matakot tayo kung may dumating pero walang in-expect.
Walang reason, right? So there are also really late closing, etc.
Yeah.
But in 2019 and 2022, transmission rates were much higher.
Yes.
Right? So
Yeah.
first hour alone, as you said,
Well,
right?
you
First
credit
4
that
hours.
also with the coverage of the technology.
Yes.
I'm sure
Oo.
telco
Legit
coverage is
talaga.
better.
Yeah, telco coverage is a lot
3G,
better.
4G.
Because in 2010, 2013, sometimes the electoral boards, then called the Board of Election Inspectors, some of them had to travel to the
Yes.
canvassing center pa before they can
They could
transmit.
And I remember, 2019 talaga, yun yung pinilit talaga yun ng Comelec na if they couldn't transmit
From the
precinct.
precinct.
they transmit at the center.
Right.
If I recall.
That's why there were some machines
Oo.
at the municipal board of canvassers. But I think for this election, they actually tried to transmit at the polling.
At the
The ground
location.
precinct mismo.
Oo.
And
Kaya
that's also the
mabilis.
reason why the transparency server also closed later, because they wanted to see if they could receive more to give a chance for transmissions.
How about the allegations na pre-programmed ang SD cards at saka yung nai-intercept ang transmission?
Pre-programmed SD cards, there's no software in the SD card.
Actually.
Okay, to begin
First
with,
point.
kung titingnan natin dun sa local source code review. Well, we sent our analysts to participate in the review. And when I asked them, wala namang calls directed to the SD card to
No.
get a routine to execute. No? Execution is not on the SD card kasi it's
On the firmware.
inside the VCM, it's in the firmware. Doon sa CPU, yung execution. So, when I checked with them, wala namang calls to the SD card to fetch instructions.
So you cannot replace
So the SD card contains configuration.
Yes.
It is basically the personality of that clustered
Clustered
precinct. So clustered precinct number 001011100, for example. So if you replace an SD card and take another SD card, then it becomes that clustered precinct. So it's configuration. It's not the
Yeah.
actual software itself. The software itself is loaded in the firmware of the machine, which is tested naman during pre-lat, right? So there's this process, the election pre-logic and acceptance testing, which is done at the COMELEC warehouse, open to observers, right? Where they actually test each and every machine. So 100% of machines will go through that test. At the end of the production line during pre-lat, there's also a quality assurance stage
Yes.
where they will extract the software and they will compare it with the hash so that the trusted build version, for example, the source code, is the one that we saw during the source code review. So that's the only part where source code was actually looked at, tested. And at the end of the day, I mean, even if we say we didn't do all of that, there's the final testing and sealing.
There's the final
right?
testing and
So
sealing,
week
yeah.
before election,
But this cycle, this 2022, the election observers got to participate in that review.
the source code review. Oh yeah, there are more than 60
There are more-
participants.
Mas marami ngayon, no? But it was only in 2013 that we were not able to do the source code review.
Before the elections.
Before
it was
the
opened after
After
the
the
elections.
elections.
I remember
But
that 2013.
in every election, 2010, 2016, 19, and 22, there was a code
Source
review by the local
And it's a
groups.
big group, right? And it's not just observers like us. Political parties sent
Parties.
their reviewers as well. And from both camps. I mean, just to be clear,
Right.
in this election, both camps did send reviewers. So that's a control as well. That's
Actually,
already there.
you should ask therefore yung
Nagpadala ba
code
kayo?
reviewer.
Nagpadala sila.
Nagpadala ba kayo ng watchers?
Nagpadala sila.
Yung mga-
And William, you were talking kanina about yung modem na napapagkamalang pinapalitan yung
SD card.
SD card.
Yeah, so that one naman is, I think, a function of training, right? So we did make a recommendation, for example, to COMELEC that the EB, when they do something, they explain what's happening.
Like what?
I am now going to
Into-
insert the USB
Yes.
modem for transmission. Then at least the poll watchers don't panic. And this was our poll watcher. It was a PPCRV poll watcher who panicked because they thought that the software was being replaced. Yeah. But again,
Modem
that's
pala.
also a function of that training. A function of training.
Ano ko lang dito kasi when we were chatting about this, you mentioned that diba the SD card, the personality of that SD card is also linked with the ballots
That's right.
and
Yes.
ano.
Yeah, the ballots are actually coded to match an SD card's configuration. You cannot use a set of ballots with another precinct that has its own SD card.
Yes.
So hindi pwede siyang pagpalitin.
And in the transmission, in the logistics of it, you also mentioned that there are
They're actually not
Mga-
sent
Oh.
together. So for the
Yeah.
record, the ballots are printed at the National Printing Office. They only meet the VCMs on
At-
election day.
on election,
On election day.
So they
and
go
all of
to
these
municipal
have,
treasurer's
serial
office.
stickers and
Yeah,
Yeah.
tamper evidence stickers and
Oo.
all of that. In coffin-looking black boxes.
Yeah.
Did
No,
you,
it's black.
Did you have to point that out? Okay.
Wala lang. Just
How
an
about the
observation.
issue naman na there are more votes than voters in certain precincts? Nangyari ba ulit ito? Parang may
we
mga
looked into
lumalabas.
this, di ba?
Yeah, so
And then
Yeah.
yung ibang precincts naman daw, bakit certain candidates got 0 votes? Imposible daw yun.
Actually, yung 0 votes, that's something we look at every election.
Every
Meron talagang
It-
0
it
votes.
does happen.
Oo.
Yeah.
It does happen.
Although this year though, mas madami mas madami yung
Sa amin marami. Mas marami.
Mas madami ngayon.
Hindi naman 0, 99. So we
Which
did
is
that
not
99.
necessarily like a function of the,
The system.
automated system, but it's more of yung on the ground, like could be
Wala talagang bumoto.
Black voting.
or
Block
black
voting.
voting.
People were
Um,
pressured.
Pero pwede din namang people are pressured. William was talking about that methodology that was I forgot the name of that think tank, but it's from California. It's called the fingerprint of election thieves, but it's really like it's comparing the total votes, the total number of voters in a precinct. So if it's like if the total number of voters in a precinct, like most of them voted, like halos walang nag-absent, walang
Yeah.
nagkasakit, and so on.
So high turnout.
And then so very high
Meron
turnout.
100% turnout eh.
Oo, yeah, like ganun. And the
meron.
combination of that with combine that with like most of that went to the winner. Then there's that higher probability
suspicious,
that
yeah.
ano to,
Suspicious
oo.
na siya.
And we've looked at that in previous elections. Usually that happens in areas where there are,
Controlled areas.
Known
controlled
controlled
votes.
voting. Yeah. So we did 4 types of analysis, and as Gemma mentioned, so every election we do it. Number 1 is high voter turnout. If 99% of registered voters showed up, we flag it and we did an analysis. And we compared 2010, 16, and 19, the number has been increasing, right? So that's the first thing we watch out for. The second thing we watch out for is overvoting rates, because there is a alleged mechanism where people will claim that the machine is not working, they collect the ballots, then they say, you go home, we'll insert
we'll
it for you,
yeah.
and they would insert it. But if they look at the position and, did not vote for my candidate, they overvote it. So there are reports of that happening. So in that particular case, we do watch for overvotes, and that's the second thing we watch for. And across, again, the 3 elections, 10, 16, and 19, the number has been increasing. The third thing we watch for is clustering of votes to a candidate, or what we call block
Yes.
voting. So we don't do 0 because we found cases where there really was
zero.
nobody who voted
Yeah.
for anybody. So 0 is not a very good indicator. So we did 99%, right? So in those cases, we looked at president. So 99 voted for one presidential candidate. 99% of voters in that clustered precinct voted for one president, one vice president, clustered to a senator, not necessarily one senator, and their House of Representatives. So we did that analysis. And again, the number is increasing, right? So these are the things that I think we should look out for. Now, things that we also looked at that nothing spectacular is transmission happened before 7 p.m. None.
Which walang nangyayari.
None.
7:08 was
More
Seven,
voter,
oh,
yeah,
ang
more,
ready naman yun.
Yeah,
more
the earliest.
voters than
7:07
registered voters
voters.
in a clustered
7:08.
precinct, none din.
None.
Right? And again, we have this long list of things we check for. Overvoting more than voters, undervoting more than voters. So we did, every single suspicious analysis across the years, we'll hear it in 2010 and we run the analysis every election. So we have this list of tests that we do.
Sanity checks.
Yeah.
Yes.
To see lang. So
Yeah.
that's the additional check. And the last point is on the what if na-tamper during transmission. So that's why we do the UPC, right? So the unofficial parallel count of the PPCRV is basically an activity where we get the 4th copy of the election return and we compare it against the transmitted copy. The idea is, in 2010, we didn't know a lot about the system. We did not do source code review. The transparency we get today versus in 2010 was very different. So we were designing a test. Okay, let's assume we have a poll watcher in every polling place. Let's assume we can attend all the FTSs. But how do we ensure the transmission wasn't tampered along the way? That's why we designed the UPC. The idea is if we get the pre-transmission copy, that means nothing was plugged into the machine until transmission. We got that copy before.
Right.
And if we compare it with the transmitted results and they match, then that is the results. So we do that for every election. So this is the 5th we've done it for. It's the biggest by far. I think we've gotten over 96,000 election returns. We were able to verify by the point I checked the records. I was trying to see if we have a newer number, but by the point we checked, we had already 74,000 verified, which is the highest ever we've ever had. Right? So I think there are more volunteers now. More of our parishes have sent returns. And at the same time, we have spectacularly more volunteers at the command
grabe
center.
yung
We were only
volunteers.
expecting 2,000, we got 10,000, right? So that's an activity we do precisely to check against electronic dagdag bawas.
In fact, mas plausible, no, nangyayari talaga that the cheating happens before the voting happens, no? Vote buying, vote suppression.
Yeah.
Anong changes ng experience natin from the past elections?
Those incidents are really outside of the automated election
diba?
system. But a lot of groups are focused more on the automated election system, forgetting that, before the elections, there is this
Something already
activities
happens,
going
yeah.
on already. Or even like the vote buying, it happens also on election day.
Actually, even after.
Even
Installment
after.
plan, right? They pay
Yes,
half
yung
now,
ano,
they pay half
If you
later.
delivered, you get the
Like the number that I personally reached me because it's somebody we
You
know,
know, oh.
is 4-5.
4 or 5.
Yeah.
4,500. And I think that's the smaller number pa. There are higher numbers. So, ano siya, medyo laganap yung vote buying.
Yeah, that's true.
So ang point natin is, these numbers na pinaghihinalaan natin, they are there precisely because before the voters entered the precinct, meron na silang deal no? Anong lalagay sa balota?
Right. And well, the problem here is it's every election it happens, even before the automation of the elections. Except now it's medyo, the reports are really widespread. You know?
Yeah.
Even our chapter chairman in Cagayan de Oro narrated his experience. No? Their family was offered, but then they refused. You're right. About 4,500 pesos worth, no? Or even higher, yung narration. So, and then I had a friend we met just this weekend. He was saying people were going to groceries a day or two after the elections.
Pati po
Bigla
may
nagkaroon ng pera.
May istorya tayo, di ba, na may mga namili ng
Cellphone.
Cellphone.
Yes.
Oo.
Yeah,
So,
after.
so a good indicator is cell phone sales
So-
post-election.
Yeah.
Grocery.
Or
occupancy
Jollibee
Groceries.
after.
Oo.
Yes.
Or even yung mga restaurants daw na puno a day or two after the
Yeah.
elections. And people are linking it with the vote buying.
Or baka mas afford nila to be frequently at Jollibee, parang ganun. Yung big lang yung out of your usual
Yeah.
lifestyle, no? Sige.
Yes.
Dagdag din yan sa GDP.
Oo.
So yun pa rin, perennial problem ng commission. But well, a couple of weeks ata, or even longer than before the elections, was the COMELEC said that they will do motu proprio investigation of the cases because itong vote buying is really delicado for observers and watchers. Especially like, for example, in our case, we tell them no, safety is priority, right? If they do testify about these incidents, the problema is, people who are actually impacted by that activity and it's reported might go back not only
Yes.
to the watcher but maybe the watcher's family.
Yes. Lalo na in some places.
Yeah, lalo na in some places. So that's really a problem that COMELEC has to really address.
Sabi nga ni James Jimenez, this cycle, no, if kung magpa-file ka ng complaint about vote buying, please see it to the end. Kasi pag hindi naman na-kompleto, anong gagawin ng COMELEC? No? Hindi pwedeng complaint lang and nobody testifies.
Hindi, pero yun nga yung
But that's
issue.
the issue.
Pero yun nga,
But that's the
oo.
issue, no? At saka, of course, the commission requires na complaint authenticated,
Oo,
mga ganyan. So, meaning magpapanotaryo ka and everything, no? So, but the commission, based on reports, had looked into certain cases yata, and they've been able to verify about 100 cases of vote buying. So, I don't know, because that's just really based on published reports.
Can we talk about the safeguards that are in place dun sa vote counting machines and sa automated system para ma-boost yung confidence sa proseso natin ngayon?
Well, one safeguard really is, when the VCM connects to the network, it connects to the network only when it is ready to transmit. And
Which means less than a minute.
Harder to hack.
Oo.
Kasi the hacker needs
disjointed yung network. In other words, there's no active connection between the VCM and the network.
Until transmission.
Until
transmission.
Only during transmission.
The way we assess it is the most vulnerable part of the system would be the VCM. Because yung isang safeguard nga, yung pre-printing
Yan, ng ER.
the first 8
Oo.
election returns before transmission. Because that is a safeguard to ensure that what is transmitted is what is
the
received.
same. Oo.
Diba? So, yun yung mga ganon. And then, of course, even the ballot, may security features yung ballot. So, they're serialized, they're only
Precinct
assigned to a particular
specific.
precinct. Mga ganon, no? And then, of course, there are other safeguards, no? Like, for example, even the I button for operations. You cannot operate the VCM without the I button and without knowing the password for those I buttons. So some of the security features. And then the transmission is actually doubly encrypted, double encryption siya. Because before the election returns is transmitted, it is encrypted. Then you use a secure channel for transmission, which also encrypts
encrypt.
the
Hiwalay
transmission
na encryption.
package. So double encryption siya. So those are some ways.
And you
to
mentioned,
use.
Lito, technically you can audit this whole process.
May
diba?
audit logs.
Because
Ano
of the
audit?
logs, diba?
Yes.
Like you can literally recreate and study the logs.
The process.
At various points
Well,
of the process.
Ideally, if we get all the logs from the VCM to
To
the
the-
transmission network logs to the server logs, you can actually rerun the elections.
Yeah, you can
Yes.
see what entirely happened.
Down to the ballot, diba?
Down to the ballot.
As
yes.
each ballot is inserted. The reason why we know this is we did the investigation of the 60 antipolo machines in 2010, right? So you opened the machines, they looked at the logs, they looked at, because we wanted to check if something happened to those machines while they were misplaced, right? And that's where we saw that the logs actually, you see what time it opened, what time it closed, ballot 1 inserted, ballot 2 inserted, it's
What you don't know
that
is
level.
who voted for.
Well, of course, because of ballot secrecy. But there is a stored image of every vote, right? You just can't tie it to a person, but you know ballot 1 came in, and there are, example, there are 200 ballots. You will see the 200 ballots there. You will even see the machine appreciation, how the machine read the
A
ballot.
vote record that's
It's called a vote records.
And that is verifiable with your other, sa RMA.
well,
Hindi,
hindi.
Or iba pa yun?
RMA is different, no? Pero yun nga, if you're able to secure the logs from the VCM to the canvassing servers, including the telco logs, that's complete chain that you can actually trace.
The vote record is used for electoral protests. So there's a stage in an electoral protest called decoding. That's when they extract the
actual
machine
file.
images from the SD card, and they will see what the appreciation is. The reason why they do that is because there were cases in the past, electoral cases in previous elections, where when they manually counted the ballots again, it yielded a different result. So they had to open the machine to look at the scanned images.
But what triggers that? Kasi
Electoral protest.
I remember, this is one of the questions that came out actually sa PPCRB na bakit akala daw nung volunteer is you
Yeah.
are
Buksan natin yung
encoding the
You were encoding the
ballots.
ballot. Nag-usap kami ni Gemma, kung may 65 million voters tayo, we cannot,
Ang tagal, no?
PCRB cannot be encoding those 60
We're only
Yes.
encoding the
Million.
election returns.
Yes.
So this process is triggered only on an electoral protest. And you have to sample, right? They don't get all. You nominate provinces, depending on the case.
There was this specific case in Santo Tomas, I think in Pampanga. There was an electoral protest. So when they looked at the ballots, parang, uy, iba nga yung results.
Iba yung manual, di ba?
And then, so they opened up the
Images.
CF cards.
The
the
CF cards
images.
pa at that time.
Oo. And they compared the image and the ballot. No? There was post-election tampering by overvoting certain
Kitang-kita
positions.
that it was they used overvoting
Voting.
to
Yes.
make the ballot, to invalidate the
To invalidate
physical
the
ballot.
counts. Yeah.
So that's an additional check, but that's of course a post-election check, right?
Pero there's a reason why we don't count the actual, you don't encode the actual, diba?
Ballots.
Ballot, diba? I mean,
It's too plenty for one.
like,
65
I
million.
remember, si
83%
Coco,
of 65
di ba,
million.
Coco Pimentel filed this case. At the national level kasi, di ba, that's a lot. So, Coco Pimentel filed this case. The subject, yung naging nun was Subiri, di ba?
Yes, Senate.
So they were,
Senate Electoral Tribunal.
And I remember that one, natapos yun, almost done na yung
Almost
term.
tapos na yung 6
Fourth
year
year.
term.
On the
Yeah.
fourth year.
Oh.
Oo, that's a very costly exercise. But,
But
and the
of-
candidate,
Well, he won,
Oo,
right?
yeah.
He
And the
won
current candidate's shoulders kasi the
Yeah.
review, diba? Then expenses.
Correct, correct.
So
But
you-
there are controls outside of that. I mean, this is like your worst case scenario.
Yeah.
You open the machine,
Talagang-
look at the ballots. But again, there's FTS, right, final testing and sealing, there's pre-lat source code review, there's UPC, there's RMA,
RMA,
there's
yeah.
so many activities. And they overlap. They check for overlapping things. If you have for example, ghost transmissions, the RMA and the UPC should catch
Yeah.
that, right? Even the FTS, even
No.
the election day poll watchers.
RMA does not catch in transmission.
No, not the transmission, but
But
if the transmission tampered the results and
Yeah.
that precinct just so happens to be an RMA precinct, you can catch
Then
that
you
as
can
well.
and look into
Yeah.
it.
Yun you
for-
can look into it in more details.
Well, going into the RMA, it's a tedious process really of reading each ballot.
oh, yun yung nagbibilang ng
Cluster
boto.
Yung
precinct.
ipapakwento ko, kasi now, the allegations are shifting to hindi daw nag-inspire ng confidence ang RMA as it's being done now.
Well, one is there's an
Explain.
allegation that it's not
Yeah,
random.
oo. Hindi
It's
daw
not
random,
random.
things like that. But
Yeah.
please
Okay,
tell us
ganito.
how it's
Ako,
done.
every time I hear that na hindi naman yung random I ask, ano ba yung parameters ninyo to determine if it's random? So give me the parameters so that I can measure it, right? Because you can go into this mathematical esoteric computations of randomness, like
Random, yeah.
a measure of entropy, for example. So pupunta ka na dyan sa mga ganyan. And it's really it's a difficult exercise. Or this Kolmogorov formula. So it would be alien to the ears of the ordinary man, no? So, but random is random, right?
In this particular case, the one who designed the randomizer for picking the ballots is the Philippine
Statistics Authority.
Right? So, I mean, I think they're credible enough to determine what random is.
Yes.
Right.
Two is, they also, we have a requirement, right? It's per legislative, per
The law
legislative
requires one precinct per
legislative
legislative district, and today we have 253 districts.
Correct.
But even computing for the number of samples out of 107,000 precincts, no, the 253, if we were to follow the law, is actually below the ideal number of samples.
Yep.
Right? So when you start computing with, again, statistical terms like
Statistical
confidence
significance,
level
confidence
and confidence intervals, so it becomes a little complicated. But using to compute that, the 253 is not sufficient, a sufficient enough sample to determine the accuracy of the precinct. So, what in the design of the random sampling, PSA decided to use an average of 3
Proportional.
per. Tapos yung selection nga ng precincts is proportional to the size of the legislative district, meaning the number of clustered precinct a particular
The
district
district.
would have. So if you're really on the small one, it's like you only have 20 clustered precincts, for example.
Bawal
Like
yan.
in the case of Batanes, one clustered precinct lang siya. But in the clustered precinct in a legislative district, for
Like
example, in
Quezon
Manila or Quezon City, where you might have like 200, 300 clustered precincts, then your allocation might be 5 clustered precincts to be covered by the random manual audit. So it's proportional representation yung sampling niya. And you have to remember that you have 253 selection pools. No? So each pool is a
Randomized per
legislative
pool.
Ira-randomize per pool yon. No? So paulit-ulit yon hanggang maubos yung
yung-
253.
And Lito, ano lang natin, and let's set the record straight here. Kasi there was one thing I read where, the selection of these
Precincts.
The
precincts
precincts.
happened before
For
the elections.
Ah.
You mentioned,
So, hindi nga random
No.
daw.
Tsaka yung random selection yun used the software.
Oo.
So, PSA designed the random selection protocol. This was developed, no? The software was developed and it was reviewed like the last week of
Source code
March
review din.
and the first week of April. I think the laptops where the software was
Sealed.
installed was sealed on April 8th, no? And it remained sealed until the day after the elections.
So take note, the
It
day.
was
May
done
10.
After May 10.
Yes, on May 10 at 10 o'clock in the morning, we had the ceremony at PICC where they opened up
Open the laptops. This is my
Yeah.
signature, ganyan.
Yeah, so it's May 10. It's
May
not
10.
Not
after.
before.
There's no pre-selection.
Yeah, and the source code review of the source code that PSA wrote it was also subject to source code review. Again, open to political parties.
Yes,
observers.
and it was audited by ISACA.
And it was audited by ISACA, which is an information security professional organization.
Yeah.
Okay, all this talks about cheating. Lahat kayong apat na tanungin ko. This could be, as you pointed out, playing into the push
For manual.
for a return to manual or going hybrid. Hybrid basically meaning magbilangan ng balota sa presinto. May red flags ba dito kayo na nakikita? Each one of you, please.
May different positions ang alam ko yung
Yes.
PPCRB and NAMPREL about it. So we start with that and then
All four of you, I want to hear.
Well, our proposal, I'm saying is proposal number 1, okay, kasi nagbabago din every election, nagbabago na, was a return to the manual elections where you write the names of your candidates on a traditional ballot, right, and then manual count at the precinct level, then electronic transmission of the election returns, and of course electronic canvassing of the results, yung ladderized pa rin. No? So we're saying na yung estimate, because based on experience, no, yung counting of votes, remember na for the automated election system, what the Comelec did was to cluster precincts, no, so that at one point the maximum number of
Fewer
voters
machines dapat.
was 1,000. No? This time 800. Mga ganon, so na-cluster yan. But the precincts, each precinct we call established precincts, has 200 voters. No? So if you do a manual count, it will take maybe somewhere between 5 to 12 hours at most. Give it 24. No? Matatapos yung count yan, no? 5 to 12 hours or even 24 hours if there's too many debates about reading the ballot.
Kasi the manual.
So, yung mga objection na yun. No? So we're saying,
Writing is not legible.
yeah. So we're saying it doesn't add much in terms of time. No? Pero doon sa electronic transmission and electronic canvassing, mas mapapabilis no, yung process.
how do you account for possible errors din, di ba, sa encoding? Kasi pwede namang, I mean every time somebody encodes something.
Well, in the traditional manual counting, you have the taras on the tally board and the tally sheet.
Yeah.
You know? Part of our proposal now is to use, of course, technology where you display, you project on the wall, no, the screen so that people can see the taras marks, no, that's being recorded. And then, of course, make controls, no, like you process only the first 50 ballots and then check whether the counts are correct. Yung mga ganun ceremonies.
Or dalawang mag-e-encode.
O dalawang mag-e-encode, no? So,
Para may
Maker check.
Parang gaya ng ginagawa nyo sa
Yeah.
But this one is on the precinct.
yeah,
But
at the
this
precinct level. So you have your...
Open to observers,
Yeah.
open to watchers.
So basically, yun yung hybrid proposal. No? Yung latest iteration ng hybrid proposal is, kasi ngayon, if you noticed, voters are more aware of the resibo. So they really check.
They check the receipt. Eh.
They check the receipt kung yung binoto nila yung reflected dun sa receipt, right? And then there's a QR code. Our version now includes using the VVPAT or the resibo to do the count.
Mas mabilis yun.
Mas mabilis.
Kasi i-scan mo lang yung QR code, and sa QR, encoded in the QR code are the selections of the voter. No? So, matatapos yung like 800 VVPATs in about an hour and a half. Mas mabilis siya. To do a parallel count with the count done by the
on the
machine
spot,
itself
parang-
at precinct level.
So parang while you're scanning, you're still doing
There's
the
still,
count of the...
pag tinatara mo pa rin yung...
No, hindi. Wala
Hindi siya
Wala
wild.
nang
Kasi
Wala
wala nang tara.
wala
No
nang
more
taras.
tara.
Ano na lang siya.
Yeah.
Parang
The-
just to double check.
Yes,
At
to
sabay.
double check the count of the vote counting machine, right? Using the resibo, and you use an ordinary cell phone can do the tallies,
Oo.
right?
And the principle is that the voter checked the
Yes.
receipt.
Yes,
The voter checked. If there was an issue, they would have said so.
yes. So yun ngayon like I said, nag-evolve yung proposal
Hindi na
namin.
handwritten.
Hindi na handwritten. Use the VVPAT.
It's the electronic counting.
Na-check
Kasi
siya ng
verified
voter, and tiwala siya na, ito yung pinili ko.
Ang PPCRB.
Well, our position has been very clear since 2010. We support full automation. So as far as we're concerned, we'd like as much technology as possible. And for a few reasons. The first reason is the one that Lito already mentioned, speed. The shorter the vulnerability window, the harder it is to cheat. If you're the time between you plug to the network and transmit and share the returns between all media entities and observers, if that's a few seconds or minutes, it's harder to cheat in a few minutes than say a few days. So that's our first reason. The second reason is auditability. In an electronic system, there are so many copies of the results and so many. I mean, there's the scanned image, there's the ballot itself, there's the VVPATs, there's the 8 printed, the transmitted copies, and whoever got the transmitted copy, marami pa, and the 22 that's printed after. There's so many pieces of the result that if you were to change the election, you have to change all of those, right? So that's the second, auditability. And the third is safety. Even in an automated system, we do have volunteers who do have trouble. Like we had a fatality in 2016, I believe. So one of our volunteers was gunned down on the way out of the polling place. So safety is an issue for us. So we want that the entire proceedings get completed as fast as possible so that our volunteers are not put on the line.
Risk.
I think there are just some concerns because even though they know that gunning down a volunteer doesn't actually change the results because that's not the basis is the electronic transmission. But again, some people don't know that, right? And they think that, that's the ballot box going to the municipal board of canvassers, right? So it's a dangerous position to put our volunteers, in particular in certain locations. So that's the third reason. So those are the 3 reasons why we normally prefer an automated system.
I think
Kayong
ang
dalawa.
one thing people
Although I like
keep
Lito's VVPAT proposal.
that's
That's a new one.
No, but that one we tried to push, remember?
Yeah.
Kasi I think people forget that in a manual election, you see the taras-taras na parang nandun ka. And I used to be, like there was this
Poll
one
watcher.
election, nag-poll
PBCRV
watcher ako,
volunteer.
PBCRV.
Yeah.
1990. But ang problema mo doon, there's so many areas na pwedeng mag-intervene and the more
Magdi-delay,
time.
oo.
And remember, coverage natin to G, matatanda na tayo. Ano to?
Dinamay.
Hinaway ka. No, so 2004, remember, yung
GMA,
Hello, Gars.
FPJ.
yeah, and then there was also this yung sa 2007 actually, that was the
07.
most interesting, Maguindanao.
Yeah.
The Maguindanao vote, the first output was 12-0. As in 12-0 at the provincial level. That never happens.
yeah.
Like
Provincial
statistically,
level,
parang lahat sila nag-troop to the and they only voted for one slate. Diba na yung slate ng
Zero.
ng administration. This was the administration of the Ampatuans, diba? So that and that was so brazen to the point where I remember there were COCs that the election officer actually hid. And I don't know where he is now. Si Lintang Bidol, remember? So things like that happen in manual elections and even after elections, diba? Diba, whenever investigations happen, Newsbreak na tayo na pag-ano na natin, pag-imbestigahan na natin. It's just that I think people forgot na may
Used to
mga
be like that.
ganun siya dati. Ganun siya yung election dati.
And I think I'll have to
Bata pa
speak
si
for
Tina.
I'll have to speak for the younger generation.
Pure
'Cause-
automation na to.
Yes,
Oo.
that's what I was gonna say. Like my first elections was I think 2013, so everything was automated na. And I think I'm gonna speak for the ones who have experienced all, parang mga digital media and everything. And I think it all boils down in general to being adaptive to new technology and how scared people can get. Kunyari, my story kanina was about the 47%. It's very mysterious, and it's highly technical, and naturally people are gonna get scared of it. But like, when social media came out, and then people got scared of it. In time, I think it's just gonna stabilize, and people will soon kami digital natives kami, like we're gonna be dominating the we're gonna be dominating the we're gonna be dominating the population demographic in the future.
You already are. 55%
Oo.
of
Yeah,
the
millennials actually, yeah.
already are.
And I think it all boils down to you getting to know more about what actually happens. And I think it's the job of the people who instigate these systems to properly explain it to them. That's why I actually made that story, to try to laymanize what LLN means, what 47, what random is.
Random is, yeah.
Diba?
Although
that
trying to
people-
define random is difficult.
It's difficult. It's a challenge.
How random is
It's a
random,
challenge,
right?
but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does
I
it have
think
to
we're
be
gonna get
normally
there.
distributed?
Kasi
Be
doon,
verified?
what I use is yung central limit theory naman, rather than LLN. You know?
Yung maging
Ganun din
comfortable lang ang mga botante sa technology.
Yes.
Yun dapat natin.
But with any technology, right,
Yeah.
there is always a
Always. There will
stage
always
where you're uncomfortable. Radio, TV, now social media. It's a cycle that I think we have to get used to
Yeah.
as well. Now, election systems is the same thing, right? But I think we really have to think about other systems like OAV. I don't cherish the thought of if I'm a voter in Minnesota, I have to go to LA to vote or Washington DC. We have to do something about that, right? That
And
can't
that's
be-
where internet voting
So
comes in.
different technologies are good for different things,
Yeah.
right? We don't have to do internet voting for the whole of Philippines right away.
What that means is, like, kasi from a vote watcher's perspective, diba, is we need to be smarter as well in how we watch
Of course.
the process,
Yes.
diba? Kasi if if it's an automated system, and it's been an automated system since 2010,
2010.
which elected Pinoy, by the way. What you need to really make sure of as a citizen is you understand the technology, diba? Like even I was watching the groups that are that have been monitoring the elections. They have also, kaya nga nang sinabi ni Lito, from one proposal to another, diba?
Yeah, it
Kasi
evolves.
Evolves.
It evolves.
Kasi we're seeing what are the possible gaps and so you become more sophisticated. It's incumbent of every political party as well to do that, diba? To have tech people
Yeah. Hindi,
watching
tsaka,
the process.
even yung election watch or observation really changes with technology.
Yes.
You know? So for example, we develop our app, for observation. Like for example, we asked our watchers, those who downloaded it, yung app, to take a photo of the top portion and the bottom portion of the ER, because there are critical
Yeah.
information that's
The QR code.
doon sa top portion hanggang doon sa vote ng president, because we knew na yung siyempre yung contentious dyan yung sa national positions, right? And then at the bottom is printed there is what is called the system hash,
Which we
right?
check.
Which we check against the electronically transmitted election returns, right? The system hash ensures that all VCMs deployed nationwide would have the same copy
Of the software.
of the software.
Yes.
Yeah. So yung mga ganon. So for this year, meron yung NAMFL app. Pati yung reporting namin, na observation reports, naka-app na siya.
In that particular case, sila nag-automated, kami manual. ER, tao yung tumitingin at
Oo.
nag-encode. So nagbaliktad tayo dyan. Di ba? Oh.
We need to wrap up. Thank you, William, Lito, Dylan, and Gemma for joining us. Debunking allegations of cheating in the recently concluded elections doesn't mean that we are ruling out future evidence, if any. It doesn't mean either that we're saying the current system is perfect and that we should dismiss it when people point out some gaps or loopholes. But for now, we are seeking to separate the speculations from evidence. And we certainly don't want to add to the noise and the disinformation in the public discourse. But we certainly are going to continue this conversation. Hindi lang sana every election cycle, but
Once every
palagi.
3 years lang
Oo,
tayo
oo,
nagkikita dyan. Ganun ba yan? Hindi, nagkikita kami pala.
we will continue this conversation until we see well thought out reforms in place. I'm Miriam Grace. Thank you for watching Newsbreak Chats. See you again in June.